Okay guys, so in this tutorial I'm just going to go over some beginner stuff, um, basically talking about object-oriented programming, constructors, just kind of some basic stuff like an overview of object-oriented programming. So what I got here is just using paint. So basically I have two classes here. One's a car class and one's a truck class. So for kind of people who don't quite understand kind of objects and constructors and things like that, I'm hoping this tutorial can kind of clear that up. So let's say you have two classes here, a car class and a truck class. So basically what a class is it's kind of like a blueprint or almost like an instruction manual. So basically if let's say we're um, creating like some kind of program to help like manufacture a manufacturing plant of like cars and trucks. And basically every time we create a new car, we would refer to basically the instruction manual or the blueprint. So I made it pretty simple, just car and truck are the only two different types of kind of vehicles. And in a better example, I would probably have maybe like a vehicle, getting a little sloppy here. But maybe I would have like a vehicle class that would be like the parent class. So I'll just write here. Let's just pretend we'll talk a little bit about inheritance as well. So in a better scenario, I would have a vehicle class, because if you see in the car class, I have in max speed. As far as the members that are in the car class, I have max speed, num doors, and transmission type. For my methods, I have drive, reverse, and park. And then if you look at the truck class, I have the same members, the same variables, and the same methods. So in a case like that, that's where you would have a parent class, where your vehicle would have all these members, because a car, a truck, a van, all those different types of vehicles are all going to have these same variables and these same methods. So instead of implementing all these methods and variables in every single class, you would just make that in the parent class, vehicle, and then you would extend the car class or the vehicle class in the car and the truck and the van class. And basically it would inherit all those methods and all those attributes. That way you didn't have to kind of recreate these in every single class, because you know that every single vehicle is going to have a drive method, a reverse method, and a park method. Um, so there's no point to rewrite that in every class. So that's kind of one object-oriented principle or concept that you want to be familiar with. And then I would say just going over again the basics of classes and objects. So like I said, classes are basically kind of like blueprints or an instruction manual. That way when you actually come down here and let's say you're in your program and you want to create a new car object, so I could call this car1 equals new. So anytime you see the new keyword, you're going to be creating a new object. So new car. So this is the data type, that first word here. So basically this is how I would make a new car object. And basically when I create this car object, I'm going to call it car1. This is calling the constructor. A constructor is basically the method that allows you to create an object. So when I create this car object, I'm going to name it car1. And you can see here when I create this object, I'm going to be able to use all these methods in this car class. I'm going to have all these variables inside this car object. Same thing for the truck class. if I wanted to create a truck object, truck is the class, or the kind of like the data type, and I could call it truck1 or whatever I want, and then I can use that new keyword and call the truck constructor. That would create a new truck object, and it would name it truck1. Okay, so let's actually code up a quick example. Let's just code up a car class. So kind of like in my example, I had int, I had max speed, int, and then I had, what else did I have? Num doors, basically the number of doors on the vehicle or the number of doors on the cars. And like I said, if I wanted to make a better example and go over inheritance, I would make a parent class called vehicle, and then car and truck would inherit these members and these methods. But for this example, I'm just trying to go over kind of constructors, objects, and classes in general. And then what else did I had? I had transmission type. And then, not too important, but let's see what other member I had, or variable. I had, oh, that looks like that's it. Okay, so that's fine. So transmission type, that's fine. So this is where I'm going to create my constructor. So by default, if you don't create a constructor method, then Java will automatically kind of create one for you. But let's go ahead and create our constructor. So constructor basically means our method, like I said, a method to create an object. And we can have multiple constructors. And you notice how it's going to have car. Whenever you're building a constructor method, it's going to have the same name, the same method name as the car. So when you, let's just code up the main method, public static void main string args main method. So if we were to come down here in the main method and we were to create, we'll just call this new car 1 equals new car, call the constructor. Okay. So create new car object. And then see this main method, or this me creating a new car object, what I think is important to understand is most of the time when you have a class, you're not, when you get into bigger software development or creating programs, this class is usually not in the same file as when you actually create the object. So this creating a new object, you might be in a different kind of file or class to create this object. And basically when you call the constructor, it's going to go find that class car, which in this case the car class is right above our code, it's right here. It's going to say, okay, he's wanting to create a new car object, so let me go find the constructor. And then this would be the constructor, and then that's where you would set max speed equal to, let's say, 100. This dot number of doors equal to 2. This dot transmission type equal to manual. End of constructor. So basically what this does is when I come down here and I create a new car object, it's going to go to your car class, it's going to find the constructor, and it's going to say, okay, I'm going to create a new car object, and then it says, okay, I have these variables, so I'm going to initialize these. I'm going to set the max speed. This is kind of like a default car object. When it creates a new car, you're saying, okay, the default car is going to be the max speed, this dot max speed, this object. I'm going to set the max speed equal to 100. This object, I'm going to set the number of doors equal to 2, and then transmission type equal to manual. And I'm going to create another constructor. So public void car. And you notice how when I call this car constructor that I'm not passing any arguments in here. But if I wanted to, let's say if I wanted to call the constructor but I wanted to pass in like the max speed, then that's when you would create multiple constructors. And we'll just say second constructor. And you can see this is giving me an error because it's basically saying, hey, you have multiple methods of the same type. But if I change this and I pass in int, and then let's pass in a max speed, and then int num doors, string trans type. And I'm going to name these different variable types just so you know that these variable types do not have to be the same as these guys up here. You can name these whatever you want. I'm just going to put max, and then I'm just going to put doors. So that's basically where I'm going to come down here. I'm going to create another car object called new car2. Now at the moment I have two options. To create a new car object, I can either use the default constructor, which will set the max speed to 100, num doors to 2, and the transmission type to manual. Or I have another constructor in my car class where I can use this constructor. This constructor takes 3 arguments. The 3 arguments it wants is an integer. So I'm going to say 150 for the max speed. I'm going to say 4 doors, and then I'm going to pass it, we'll say automatic. The constructor is undefined. Oh, I haven't defined this yet. Okay, so I actually got to go in here, and then same thing, this dot max speed equals to, I'm going to set the max speed of this object to whatever the user passed in or whatever I passed in. So in this case, I passed 150. So when I pass 150 into this constructor, it's temporarily going to call that max. So I'm going to say, hey, that's equal to the max that the user passed in. This dot num doors. So this new object that I'm creating, oops, I didn't mean to do this. So let's do, this was supposed to be for the second object. So let me cut that out of there. And then let's do that. And that's just giving me an error because I haven't finished defining this yet. So like I said, this object that we're creating, we're just going to use the default constructor. And if you go up here, it's going to look for this constructor, and it's going to create an object with these default values. But if I want to use the constructor that I actually pass in the values, and they're not default, then that's when it's going to go find this constructor. And I'm going to pass in 150, and then I'm going to pass in 4 for the doors. So this object, the number of doors, I'm going to set it equal to the doors that they pass in. So doors, and then this dot trans type equals to, oh, so transmission type equals trans type. Okay, why is this still giving me an error? Constructor int string is undefined. Int string is undefined. Let's probably did something silly. Transmission type equals manual. Fix some errors here real quick. Oh, it's because I'm silly and I put void. You don't need to, I'm sorry, you don't need to put void for a constructor. So there we go. So let's save this. And this is supposed to be, ugh, it deleted my, okay, so all we have to do is get rid of the void here. Get rid of the void, because it knows that you're not returning anything because this is a constructor. So I was just being silly and I accidentally had the void there. So yeah, for a constructor, you do not need to put a return type. Okay, so now we should be good. So go over this one more time. We're creating a new car object, a new car object with default values. And then we're going to create another object, a new car object with specified values. Okay. So, and we can create multiple different constructors. We could create another constructor that just takes in the max speed, and then the other values we can just set to defaults. You can make multiple constructors. They just have to have different kind of arguments. Like I said, you can't make multiple constructors that have empty arguments. You can only have one. Okay, so we created our two car objects, and now we can kind of just print them out to make sure that they're working properly. So we'll do system.out.print ln, and we will do car 1 speed. I'm just kind of making stuff up here. So, and then we'll do new car 1 dot max speed, and then we'll copy this, Control C, and let's print out car 2 dot speed. Okay, so we'll go over this real quick one more time. Hopefully this video is not getting too long, but so we got a car class here. Like I said, a car is pretty much like a blueprint or instruction manual to create an object. It basically is gonna, when you create an object, that's the whole point of kind of object-oriented programming, is to create objects. So when I come down here and I create an object, I need to call the car constructor. It's going to go to the car class. It's going to find that constructor to help create an object. This one is like the default constructor. We didn't pass it any values. So it's going to say, okay, you didn't pass me any values, so I'm just going to set those to these default values. And then this object that we create called new car 1 is going to have all these default values, and then it's also going to have any methods that we have in that class. So I'm going to hurry up and create a method. real quick, just called, let's actually do, yeah. So we're just going to call a method, we're just going to create a quick method called drive. This is going to be really simple. It's just going to print out the word drive, just for simplicity and the example. Drive. Drive method. I always like to explain how the main method is the driver code. So yeah, once we create this new car object using the car constructor, the default one, it's called the default constructor. Let me put that up here as well. It's always called the default constructor because it doesn't take any arguments. So once we create that, it's going to have those default values, and then that car object also, if you look in this car class, it also has a method that it can use called drive. We can basically new car one.drive, and what that'll do is your new car one object has a drive method inside of it, and it'll go to this method and just print out drive. That's all that's going to do. Okay, so end of class. Let's go ahead and run this. So our car one, we use the default constructor. Basically, if you go to this, it goes to the default constructor, creates that object, sets the max speed to 100. So that makes sense. It printed out 100 for the max speed. Then we went to car 2. We created car 2. We called the constructor, not the default one, we called this constructor, which takes in 3 arguments. So we set the speed to 150. So then it printed out 150. And then we took the new car 1 object and we called the drive method that was inside of it. And that's something pretty simple, nothing too crazy, just printed out drive. Okay, that's it. Thanks for watching, guys.